welcome to Layla. Layla is going to talk on faith, food, and compassion, the vegan-Muslim connection, and Layla represents Plant-Based Health Justice and is the founding director. So over to you, Layla. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Can you? Yeah, sorry. I think it's working. Hi. It's really great to be here to talk about Islam. You know, religion, I have to move a little bit here. Religion isn't just about, a set of beliefs and principles. It's really about traditions that you grow up with, practices and ideas that shape your worldview. So when I talk about Islam, I'm really talking about my people, my roots, and my story. And so I'm really grateful to all of you for being here and taking an interest in Islam and my people. I know there isn't like kind of us versus them, but still, this is the community I feel close to. Now, I know there is a lot going on in the world. We have been witnessing a live street genocide for 17 months. And, the way the Western media and Western governments have handled it, gosh, it's really horrible. And if they can get away with this, nothing we as animal rights activists do will make any difference whatsoever. We will never get we will never be close to animal liberation. So as a Muslim, it feels a bit strange taking the microphone and talk about anything but the genocide. And I hope my talk can still matter. I hope that my talk can help build bridges, create understanding and a space where animals, Black and brown people, Muslims are not just respected and valued, but also protected. Now, usually when I start giving a talk, I like to tell you a little bit about myself, how I went from being a doctor to a nutritionist and educator, how I founded the Plant-Based Health Justice. But the more I speak up for animals, the more I recognize the importance of bringing my whole self to the talk. So, I'm an Iranian Azeri, I'm Muslim, and I'm also an immigrant. But I'm also the granddaughter of a very religious Muslim woman who may not have been vegan, but she was the most compassionate person I have ever met. She was kind to humans and animals. And she's actually the one who planted the seed of compassion in me. And when I say she was religious, I mean you would only see her eyes, that kind of religious. And it pains me to see that people like my grandma are now being attacked and misrepresented. And not just in political spaces, but also in vegan spaces. In spaces that are supposed to be about compassion and justice. Now, before getting to the main part of the talk, I ran a poll. And 10 people said they are somewhat familiar with Islam. Are they here? Okay, nobody. Is there any Muslims here? No. Any non-vegans? Okay. Okay, that's fine. It's a safe space to learn. I'm glad to have actually people who are non-vegans and non-Muslims. I think that's how we learn. So that's good. It's all good. So there are currently 2 billion Muslims in the world. That makes a quarter of the global population. And in the UK, we have 4 million Muslims, which makes Islam the second largest religion in the country. Now, when somebody says they are not religious, religion still plays a role in the upbringing, in the way that it influences their thinking, what they eat, and how they understand what is right or wrong. And so, religion is really important. It is kind of embedded in culture, family, and even in laws. And as vegans, we know how it is when you talk to non-vegans and they say lots of reasons why they cannot stop eating animals. And we know that is not based on facts. It is just based on what they have been taught, what they heard when growing up, or what they hear in media. So the same applies to Muslims. When Muslims say that veganism is not compatible with Islam, it's really not the religion. It is just based on what they have heard. It's not real. And the other problem is that a lot of Muslims, perceive veganism as a white colonial tool. and I'll get back to that later. Now, all these screenshots are from posts shared by vegans. Unfortunately, a lot of vegans believe that Muslims are cruel, violent, probably because of halal slaughter. They believe that, Islam is the problem. So imagine, that is your thinking, that is going to block understanding. So today I hope that I can introduce you to the real Islam, not the one that you hear in the media, in the headlines. The very word Islam comes from salam, which is the greeting, and it means peace. Islam is actually founded on really strong ethical foundations. And one of the core values of Islam is what we call rahmah, which is mercy, compassion. And this value is so important that every chapter in Quran, except one, starts with the phrase, in the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. And this is not something symbolic. Compassion is meant to guide every aspect of a Muslim's life. In fact, the Prophet Muhammad was sent as mercy to all beings. All beings meaning humans, animals, the environment, the entire ecosystem. And he lived that mercy. There are so many stories of him being kind to the poor. He even showed mercy to his enemies, and he was very compassionate towards animals. The Prophet said that animals are part of Allah's ayah. Ayah means family. And whoever is kind to Allah's family gains his pleasure. Now, I'd like actually to pause here and say something. Allah is simply the Arabic word for God. Okay? Quran is written in Arabic, and obviously Muslims read Quran, and that is why they refer to God as Allah. It's not like a separate God. And obviously I'm speaking English, and in English when I speak, when we use God, we use the pronouns he and him. So that's why I don't really like to say he, because God doesn't have a gender. And I think that is so important to recognize, because again, there is this misperception that women in Islam are oppressed. So if I keep saying God, he, people will think, oh yes, it's a male religion. It's not the case. So I just wanted to put it out there. So moving on, the Prophet saw a man taking the baby bird, from a nest, and he said, who has hurt the feeling of this bird by taking its young? Return them to her. Another time, he saw a man who was about to slaughter a sheep, and the man hesitated, didn't kill the sheep, and the Prophet said, because you showed mercy to the sheep, God will show mercy to you. Now, again, these are not sweet, kind of heartwarming stories. These are ethical teachings, because as Muslims, we are meant to live by his example. In Quran, it says all animals are communities like you. They form societies. They have agency. They even worship gods in ways that we humans don't understand. So they are not tools or objects. They are sentient beings with rights. And there is a hadith. Hadith is like a saying, like a traditional saying that has been, passed on through generations. And there is a hadith saying that a man was forgiven his sins because he gave water to a thirsty dog. Another hadith speaks of a woman who was condemned because she was starving a cat. So you see, in Islam, compassion towards animals is not optional. It is actually a religious obligation. Harming animals is seen as a spiritual offense, because we humans are the guardians of Earth. We are supposed to take care of the Earth and its inhabitants. Now, I already touched on halal in my introduction. Halal means simply permissible. I know some of you may know the word halal, but usually in the context of animal-based food. But halal is just simply like permissible, and just because there are certain acts and actions in Islam that we can, it's allowed to do that. And the opposite would be haram, which is forbidden. So the Prophet never said that meeting is required. So meeting it is not required. It is. He only acknowledged that it was a necessity in his time. And when I say his time, I'm talking about the 7th century Arabia, where food was scarce. People survived on eating whatever was available. But that is not the case today, is it? we have options. And just because something is permissible doesn't mean that it is ideal in every context. Context is so important. So yes, I should add here, eating or using animals for food is in Islam permissible, but it is only done under the most ethical conditions and with mercy, never for pleasure, never for sport, never for convenience. But as I said, the context matters, and nowadays it is not a necessity. Now, obviously, I'm a Muslim, but what I love about Islamic law is that it is not rigid. It is based on higher objectives like protecting life, protecting environment, protecting creation. And scholars throughout the history have said that when circumstances change, the interpretation must also change. Quran is actually a book for all times and circumstances. So the teachings are for all generations and cultures. And for that to happen, the interpretations must also change depending on circumstance. So, what made sense in the 7th century doesn't make sense nowadays because our awareness has changed, our resources have grown. And when we have more resources, we also have more moral obligation. And this is also true when you look at other indigenous and shamanic traditions, which have a high reverence for animals. They do kill, or they used to kill animals for food, but it was always done with gratitude and humility. It was never done for pleasure or sport the way we do it nowadays. And even, when it comes to, vegan spaces, we acknowledge that context is important. We don't tell Eskimos that they should stop eating fish. And the same way that we don't expect people in Gaza right now to be eating vegan because we know that somebody else, Israel, is actually controlling what food is allowed in. Having said that, the people I know, the vegans in Gaza, they are still eating vegan, but that's not the point. Anyway, so ethics without context isn't ethical anymore. And the same applies to Islam. Life is sacred. Killing is never glorified. And when we look at Islamic values, from the ethical framework of Islam always invites us to ask ourselves in any situation, what is the least harm? What would cause the least harm? And what practices actually protect life? So I guess it is clear when it comes to animal-based foods, the least harm is not killing them. So scholars have said when the harm of something outweighs its benefit, it must be reconsidered. So these are these Islamic scholars. And when we look at industrial, meat production, it's immense harm to animals, to the planet, to humans. So I think it's really clear when we look at Islamic principles, which is Rahmah, is the compassion, mercy, Ihsan is benevolence, no harm, and Qad is justice. All these core values, and these are really core values, they actually invite us to choose the most compassionate path. As I mentioned, the earth is a trust. It has been entrusted to us humans. It is not ours to dominate. We are actually accountable for how we treat, the earth and its inhabitants. And I already mentioned that halal means permissible, so eating animals is permissible in Islam. But there is another concept which is called tayyib. And a lot of scholars say, yes, eating meat is halal in Islam, but is it tayyib? Is it pure? Is it wholesome? Is it good? And when we look at factory farming, how animals are treated, or I should say abused and mistreated, the way they are confined, they are mutilated, forcibly bred, and slaughtered, all of that doesn't align with the Islamic values. And yes, just simply, when we look at the core values from an Islamic ethical standpoint, these practices are not just questionable, they are actually wrong. Do not use the backs of your animals as pulpits. That's something that the Prophet Muhammad said. So don't use animals for comfort, convenience. They are not here for us. They are not here for us to be abused and misused for our convenience. Another time he saw a camel who had a large load, and he was really upset, and he said, "Fear Allah and do not oppress this poor animal who cannot voice his concerns." So imagine, what would the Prophet Muhammad say now if he would look at the slaughterhouses, how animals are being treated? So I think it's very logical to think, what he would do and say. Now, talking about ending animal cruelty in Islam is not about bringing anything new to Islam, because the core values of Islam are compassion, justice, and accountability. It's really about living Islam in the context of today, because today we have access to food. Eating animals is not a necessity anymore. So, we need to really take that into consideration. And in Islam, again, as I said, life is sacred. Actually, Islam aims to protect life, not destroy it. It aims to reduce harm, not normalize it. So I think that's really important to consider. Now, I ran another poll and asked people, what they would like to take away from this talk. Obviously, I don't think anybody is here from the people who actually answered the poll. And nobody wants to challenge Islamophobia in vegan spaces, but half of people want to make the movement more inclusive. But here's my question. How can you make the movement more inclusive when there is Islamophobia? When vegan influencers, founders of vegan organizations, when they share Islamophobic posts? How can you invite Muslims into a space where Islam is seen as the problem? I mean, would you like to go to a space where they see you as the problem? So I think that is really important. We cannot talk about veganism to Muslims without addressing Islamophobia in the movement. So how do we talk to Muslims about veganism? Well, I know all of you are non-Muslims, so if you're really genuinely interested, you need to recognize and challenge Islamophobia around you, but also within yourself, because at the end of the day, you were brought up in the system, in this system. You are also exposed to all these media narratives, media headlines, where it's talked about Islam, Muslims want to kill everybody, we are out there killing everybody, that's what we want to do, we are so violent. So we need to challenge Islamophobia. We need to make the space safe before they can actually join the movement. In fact, I believe we're actually pushing them away with the way we are reacting. And then when you are talking to non-vegans, Muslim non-vegans, don't colonize. Don't try to be the white savior. Again, obviously you are not Muslims, and the information you are going to share with them, you need to come from a place of deep respect for the person in front of you. How can you talk to a Muslim about compassion towards animals if you don't show the same compassion towards them? So that's really important. Now, I know there aren't any Muslims here, but I'm going to still talk about that. We Muslims, as I said, we are actually guardians. We need to take care of everybody, in fact, not just our own community. But as Muslim vegans, we have the responsibility to make the spaces safe for, our fellow vegans and, our fellow Muslims who are not vegan yet. And sadly, in the last 17 months, a lot of Muslim vegans have been silent about the genocide, and that has created distance. That has actually made our job much harder. Because if you're not showing any interest in Muslims and what is going on in their lives, I know Palestinians are not all Muslims, but the majority are, and so it is really important. The silence has really actually made our job much harder to reach, Muslim communities. And if any Muslim vegans want to talk to, non-vegans, I would really recommend just leading with Islamic values. Compassion, especially compassion. Every Muslim knows about compassion. As I said, Quran starts with that phrase, and everybody, even those who are not religious, everybody knows that phrase, and they know compassion is one of the main, kind of core values of Islam. Now, another advice that I have is that to focus on the Prophet Muhammad rather than the different traditions, because if you're familiar with Islam somewhat, you know that there are different traditions. There are Sunnis, there are Shia, and then even among Shias there are different kind of branches, and they all have their own scholars, so they all have their own references. But one thing we all agree on is the Prophet Muhammad, and there are plenty of stories of how he actually showed, compassion towards animals. So I think, we don't need to need anything else, just telling those stories, and that should be the starting point. And obviously, having compassion, being kind, that is the only way we can actually change hearts. That's it. It's very short. Thank you. You didn't even need that. Yeah, I told you. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Layla. I'd never learned about those things myself from an Islamic viewpoint, Islam. So thank you for sharing that to the audience. So yeah, thank you, amazing. So a few questions from the audience. Okay, so as white atheists, what is the most constructive and most respectful way to start this conversation with someone who is Muslim?
Again, I think, firstly, we need to make veganism as a concept more appealing. I don't know how else to put it. To be honest, we, when we talk about infighting and all of that, but yes, we are angry because we want to end animal cruelty, but we're also angry a lot of times. We actually take out that anger towards humans, other humans, and if they don't look like us, if they don't act like us, it's much easier to be angry towards them. So I would really say, find that compassion in your heart first. So I think that is the starting point. And then just asking questions, be curious. A lot of times, and again, I don't want to talk about, how to do effective vegan advocacy, but I think if we are curious about the other person rather than going there, I have the solution. And here I am, I want to give it to you because, I know better than you. If you're just curious and asking them questions and letting them come to the conclusion, then we can achieve much more, because it is coming from them and they feel like, oh, they own that narrative. So just ask them questions, and you're actually in a much better position because you're non-Muslim. Just ask them about Islam and what Islam says. For me, it's more difficult because I'm already Muslim, so we'll have Christian like kind of, no, Islam says this, Islam says that, but you don't have that. So be curious and just ask them questions, and then that is your starting point.
Thank you. Another one, which is also a similar question, when talking to Muslims about veganism, would using Islamic references, terminology, values, and compassion be as important as the vegan issues themselves?
Well, I think, to be honest, veganism is about compassion. So I wouldn't say there is a separate value system. And I think that is any sort of advocacy we are doing, compassion should be at the heart of our advocacy. But again, that's my belief. I did Melanie Joy's workshop yesterday, so I'm very careful with the terminology I use now. That's my belief, that we should actually lead with compassion. And again, compassion is one of the core values in Islam. And if when you're talking to a Muslim who is not vegan and you're referencing that kind of Islamic values, you should also say where you are getting that reference from. Point to the websites you have read or heard about, or any people, any Muslims. So, and that helps. That shows that actually you have done your research, that you are genuinely interested in Islam, and that you are not just coming up with imaginary ideas. It is coming from a Muslim. And I know it's not a question, sorry. I just want to add that because I think it's really important. Because after my talk, you may think, oh, Islam is so wonderful. So how come that, you have all these slaughterhouses in Muslim countries or Muslim majority countries? And we need to, again, recognize what a religion is and how people practice it are two different things, especially when it comes to a religion, and that applies to Islam as well, being weaponized. So I don't like to call it the political Islam, but there is this political Islam which we know and hear about in the media. And the way animals are treated at the moment in Muslim countries, it is really capitalism and a system that prioritizes profit over principle. It has nothing to do with Islamic values. And I know I keep going back to Gaza, but if it had anything with Islamic values, all the Muslim countries would stand up for Gaza, and they haven't. So that shows you that they don't care about Islam, the true Islam. It is just about what serves them, what profits them. And the same applies when it comes to animals. But sadly, what happens is when the government, that is what they promote, the lay people, the lay Muslims, in the country, they assume that is the real Islam. So nobody is, and it makes our job harder, and it makes also the job of scholars harder. But we do have scholars who, question all of that. But as I said, there is also this friction, and again, it goes back to the political Islam, because I'm sure you are aware, a lot of the Muslim countries are, they don't agree on a lot of stuff, and then they say, yes, but in my country we do it this way, and in your country you are doing it different. So my understanding of Islam is the better one, and that's why I would really focus on the Prophet Muhammad, because everybody agrees and we all respect him. So, thank you.
Thank you. Great answer. And a good question coming up. How do you feel vegan organisations can productively address Islamophobia in the movement?
Firstly, they shouldn't contribute to it. I think that would be a very good starting point. I'm not going to name anybody, but some of you may know a vegan, the founder of a vegan organization, a very well-known vegan organization, recently made an Islamophobic post. It was horrendous. And I was very disappointed, because I think, they have a huge platform. When they put it out there, they give permission to all the other people to be Islamophobic as well. So, I think if they stop contributing to that, that would be really great. And because they are actually part of the problem themselves. And then, they shouldn't have token Muslims. We need to have real conversations. I know there are some vegan Muslims who have made a name for themselves, but sometimes when I look at the content, I wonder if they are actually talking to a fellow Muslim, or if they are just talking to the Western audience, and then trying just to kind of, it is about the white comfort. And a lot of times, what they post, even, about some of the foods we have celebrations, includes, slaughtering animals. And when they talk about that, it is just getting the reactions from, non-Muslim vegans, so that everyone says, oh yes, you are right. So, I think we need to have people who are not about money, who don't care about the profit, who don't care about funding. And I guess one of the reasons I'm lucky is because I don't get any grant or funding. I'm not being paid by anyone to talk and say whatever I like to say. So I have that freedom. And I just think, if, I just think, firstly, don't contribute to Islamophobia. When you see it, speak up. And if a Muslim says that this feels a bit Islamophobic, then just be curious and ask questions. And I should add, I'm an Iranian, and Iran is a Muslim majority country, but a lot of Iranians are anti-Islam. And again, that goes back to the political Islam. So I know that even if somebody says, oh, I'm Muslim, and that's okay, actually, yes, you are right, women are oppressed and all that. So, you need to take that with a pinch of salt. So I know it is not easy. I really appreciate that. And that's why we haven't really made any progress, sadly. But I think we can make the changes. And I think people are kind of more willing now. To be honest, the genocide, as horrible as it is, it has opened people's eyes and hearts. And hopefully we can actually start, being more compassionate towards each other and non-vegans as well. And it doesn't matter which religion they're from.
Thank you. One more question, if that's okay. Yeah. So thank you for making vegans understand the ethics of Islam. I think there is a quote in Quran: "Do not make stomach the graveyards of animal." Could you expand on its origin, please?
No, it's in Quran. There are so many chapters. I haven't read. Well, actually, I have read the Quran a few times, but in Arabic. not the translation, because again, the translation is very symbolic. So you need somebody actually to help you understand it, interpret it. Because as I said, as circumstances change, so does the interpretation. And so yes, it is in Quran, but I wouldn't even know if it is the exact translation. It could have been slightly different.
Maybe one more question from the floor. Just got time for one more question. Anyone's got questions?
Yes, I guess sometimes it can help. And I think, again, actually, my job is a nutritionist. So when I look at nutrition and when you look at the traditional diet of all these Muslim majority countries, it is plant-based. The Prophet himself was actually predominantly plant-based. So it is, again, the influence of capitalism and colonialism that introduced meat into these countries. So you're right. A lot of our dishes are actually originally in plant-based. It's very easily veganized. Let's put it that way. Thank you. Make one. Oh, okay. Yeah, go on. Oh, yes. That's it. The Kite Runner, I agree, it's an amazing book, but it was written for a Western audience. So I think that is the critique I would bring to a lot of these books that are written in the. Anyway, going back to the slaughterhouse, I would really not focus on the slaughterhouse and focus on what the religion or what the purpose of slaughterhouse are to treat animals. Because of the religion, yeah. Oh, okay. So talk to the people who do it, or again, I would go back to the same, because it is not about how you kill the animal. The animal should not be killed, and I think that's it. The animal should not be slaughtered. And I would really go back to what the Prophet has said about how we should be treating animals in general. And then if you want to take it any further, it's about, if it is a necessity, if it is not, it needs to be done under really the most ethical conditions, not the way it is done at the moment, like this is lined up and killed. So, but then I wouldn't go that far. I would start from the beginning. It's much easier.
If it's okay to ask the question just outside, if that's okay, it's just we got a quick turnout for the next speaker. But thank you, everybody, and thank you, Leila. Thank you so much.